The Horizon Arc was supposed to be humanity's crowning achievement, a grand tour bus trundling its way through the cosmos, carting 1,000 souls to a new home far away from the overcrowded, underwhelming Earth. But today, it felt more like a rusty bucket held together by duct tape and desperate prayers to gods no one believed in anymore. Captain Nerys Quaid squinted at the console, as if her glare alone could shame it into functioning properly. Diagnostic report, Ludo. Or do we just close our eyes and hope the ship can fly as blind as we are? Ludo Vex, the chief engineer, scratched his head with a grimy hand, leaving a streak of oil through what might have once been hair. Well, Cap, the good news is the starboard thrusters aren't actively on fire. Bad news is they might be soon. Quaid sighed, half wondering if anyone back on Earth was laughing at them. Great, just spectacular. Remind me again why I picked this gig over a cushy desk job. Something about hating people and preferring the company of malfunctioning machinery. Ludo replied with a crooked grin that showed more teeth than was reassuring. Horizon Arc's command deck wasn't exactly the bridge of a star cruiser out of those old sci-fi serials, more like the control room of a rundown carnival ride. Nerys sat in a chair that squeaked more than a mouse trapped in a cheese factory, surrounded by screens that flickered like they were powered by an asthmatic hamster on a wheel. Got a ping from Sector 3, Ludo said, poking at his console as if prodding a sleeping bear. More of those temporal anomalies. Temporal what now? Nerys asked, rubbing her temples. She hadn't signed up to deal with timey-wimey bullshit. That was supposed to be some other captain's problem, preferably one with a penchant for quantum physics and a degree in making sense of the senseless. It's like time's playing hopscotch, Ludo explained, knowing full well the futility of trying to make sense of it. Things happen out of order or all at once or never. Last week, I was sure I heard my own voice telling me not to trust my future self. And you didn't think to mention this little slice of insanity sooner? Nerys asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Ludo shrugged, a lopsided gesture that seemed to imply he had given up trying to corral sense from nonsense long ago. Thought it was just the recycled air screwing with my head. On the screens, the data scrolled past like a novel written by an author on a bender, full of plot holes and continuity errors. The Horizon Arc was a masterpiece of human ingenuity, sure, but there were days when Nerys wondered if they should have maybe tested it a bit more before shooting it into the great beyond. Well, if the universe is unraveling, we should at least try to hold the thread, Nerys muttered, punching a few buttons in a way that suggested she'd rather be punching faces. Any word from the colony folks? Ludo asked, as though expecting the answer to be as nonsensical as everything else. Not a peep, Nerys said, her voice tinged with the kind of resignation that only came from repeated exposure to cosmic-level screw-ups. Either they are ignoring us or they are dealing with their own slice of hell. Probably both, Ludo said. Can't blame him. If I had a choice, I'd ignore us too. Nerys leaned back in her chair, which creaked in protest. All right, let's get a team down to Sector 3. See if we can make sense of this time-jumping nonsense before it starts demanding we call it doctor, Ludo snorted. I'll grab the suckers. As Ludo shuffled off to assemble a team of unfortunate volunteers, Nerys allowed herself a moment to stare out into the void. Space was supposed to be full of wonder, a testament to the human spirit, or so the brochures had said. But right now it felt more like a vast, indifferent expanse, just waiting for them to make one wrong move so it could swallow them whole. Captain, a voice crackled over the intercom belonging to Jane Aiko, the ship's communications officer. We've got an incoming message. It's kind of weird. Weird how? Nerys asked, already dreading the answer. Weird like. It says it's from us. From the future, Nerys groaned. Of course it does, because why the hell not? All right, patch it through. Let's see what our future selves have to say. The message buzzed across the speakers, crackling with static and temporal distortion. This is Captain Quaid from the future, don't trust. The message cut out abruptly, leaving only the ominous echo of the words hanging in the air. "Well, that's not ominous at all," Ludo said from the doorway, a ragtag group of crew members with him, each looking more bewildered than the last. "Time travel and cryptic warnings. Could this day get any better?" Nerys said, shaking her head. Ludo smirked. "I dunno, we could try poking the big red button that says do not press." "Tempting," Nerys replied, then turned to the crew. "All right, folks, you're heading to Sector 3. Find out what's causing these anomalies and stop it. And for the love of whatever deity you believe in, try not to make it worse." The crew nodded, a mix of grim determination and the kind of gallows humor that kept them all going. As they filed out, Nerys caught Ludo's eye. "Keep me posted," she said. "Like I have anything better to do," Ludo replied with a shrug. Once they were gone, Nerys returned her attention to the flickering consoles, her mind a whirl of possibilities, each one more improbable than the last. The Horizon arc was supposed to be a journey toward a new beginning, but right now, it felt more like they were hurtling toward some kind of cosmic punchline. "Jane," she called over to the comms officer, "keep analyzing that message. See if there's anything we can salvage from it." "On it, Captain," Jane replied, already tapping away at her console. The ship hummed around them, its systems a symphony of beeps and whirs that had become the background music to their lives. Nerys wondered if there was a version of herself out there, somewhere in time, who was sipping a margarita on a beach instead of dealing with this temporal headache. "Captain," Jane's voice interrupted her musings. "I think I've got something." Nerys perked up, striding over to Jane's station. "What have you got?" Jane pointed at her screen where a jumble of code danced erratically. "It's hard to make out, but there's a timestamp embedded in the message. It's from 3 days in the future." "3 days, huh?" Nerys mused. "Love a deadline. Motivation's always been my strong suit. Should we be worried?" Jane asked, her eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. "I've given up on worrying," Nerys said with a wry smile. "Now I just expect the worst and hope to be pleasantly surprised when it doesn't go completely to hell." As the Horizon arc continued its journey through the stars, the crew in Sector 3 were about to uncover the first breadcrumb on a trail that could lead them to salvation or disaster. Either way, it promised to be one hell of a ride. The Horizon arc drifted through the void like a geriatric on a leisurely walk, every creak and groan of its aging frame a reminder of its impending breakdown. Captain Nerys Quaid, perched on a chair that seemed to have its own death wish, felt more like a babysitter for a ship full of dysfunctional adults than a captain leading a mission to save humanity. Jane Aiko's sensors had lit up like a Christmas tree with the detection of an anomaly in Sector 3. It was the kind of alert that, on a well-maintained ship, would inspire decisive action or at least a collective groan. Here, it was met with a chorus of "not again," and the general malaise of a crew that had long since resigned itself to the universe screwing them over. "Captain, the anomaly's intensifying," Jane reported, her voice tinged with an all-too-familiar mix of dread and sarcasm. "Great. Just what we need," Nerys muttered, drumming her fingers on the console as if hoping it might somehow spur the ship into action. In the bowels of the ship, Ludo Vex and his ragtag team of would-be temporal investigators were preparing to descend into the chaos of Sector 3. Armed with barely functional equipment and a collective sense of impending doom, they were the closest the Horizon arc had to heroes, a fact that was as comforting as a rattlesnake hug. Ludo, with his unkempt hair and perennial oil stains, looked like someone who'd lost a fight with a maintenance manual. "All right, folks, listen up," he said, addressing the crew with the authority of a man who half expected mutiny. "We're dealing with anomalies that make as much sense as a politician's promise. Keep your eyes peeled for anything out of the ordinary. And by ordinary, I mean anything that might kill us slightly slower than everything else." "Got it, Chief," grunted one of the crew members, a burly woman named Marnie who looked like she could win a staring contest with a black hole. As they trudged through the dimly lit corridors, the Horizon arc seemed to amplify every sound, the clanking of tools, the hiss of vents, the occasional curse muttered under someone's breath. The atmosphere was charged with a tension that could have powered a small city if only they could harness it. They reached Sector 3, a section of the ship that had seen better days. The walls were scarred and pitted, as if they'd been used for target practice by an over-enthusiastic marksman. The air was thick with the metallic tang of ozone, a sure sign that the anomaly was playing merry hell with the ship's systems. "Anyone else feel like we're about to walk into a horror movie?" quipped a nervous technician called Sam, his eyes darting around like a ferret on caffeine. "Just remember, if the killer's behind you, don't bother screaming. We'll pretend we didn't hear," Ludo replied, earning a round of nervous laughter that was more forced than a failed comedian's set. They reached the epicenter of the anomaly, where reality seemed to shimmer like a mirage on a hot day. It was here that they encountered the last thing anyone expected: aliens. Not the friendly, take-me-to-your-leader kind, but the sort that looked like a cross between a squid and an accountant, complete with tentacles and an air of bureaucratic menace. Ludo blinked at the sight, wondering if the recycled air was playing tricks again. Hello. You lost." The alien, for its part, regarded them with an expression that might have been disdain, amusement, or just indigestion. "We are the Chronarchs," it intoned, its voice a mix of gravel and static. "This vessel is in violation of the temporal accords." "Temporal what now?" Marnie asked, her forehead creasing into a frown that suggested she was seconds away from solving world hunger through sheer willpower. "The timeline has been disrupted. We are here to correct it," the Chronarch replied, sounding like an intergalactic traffic warden. Ludo rubbed his temples, trying to wrap his head around the absurdity of their situation. "So, what, your time cops? Here to slap us with a ticket for doing 90 in a 60-year zone?" The alien's tentacles twitched, a gesture that could have meant anything from agreement to a threat to pulverize them. "In simple terms, yes. Your presence here is a deviation. It must be remedied." The crew exchanged looks, a silent conversation playing out in shrugs and raised eyebrows. "Look, Mr. Chronarch, we're just trying to get to point B in one piece," Ludo said, hoping diplomacy might work where common sense had failed. "If this is about that whole don't trust your future self thing, we're as confused as you are." The Chronarch's eyes narrowed, or at least, Ludo assumed they did, given the absence of recognizable facial features. "Your actions have ramifications beyond your understanding. This vessel must be returned to its proper course." Before anyone could respond, the air shimmered again and the Chronarch vanished, leaving behind an aura of menace and the kind of existential dread that no amount of coffee could cure. "Well, that went well," Sam said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Could have been worse," Ludo replied. "They could have vaporized us on the spot." Back on the command deck, Nerys was dealing with her own slice of chaos. The message from their future selves played over and over in her mind like a broken record, each repetition raising more questions than it answered. "Any luck deciphering that message, Jane?" she asked, more out of habit than hope. Jane shook her head, her expression one of grim determination. "It's like trying to read a book on a roller coaster. It's all there, but it keeps flipping upside down." "Sounds like my last relationship," Nerys muttered, turning her attention back to the swirling data on the screens. In the grand scheme of things, they were little more than a blip on the universe's radar, a small ship and its crew caught in a storm of cosmic nonsense. As if on cue, Ludo's voice crackled over the intercom. "Cap, we've got a situation down here. Turns out the anomaly's our new best friend, the Chronarchs." Nerys groaned, resisting the urge to bang her head against the console. "Great. Aliens with a penchant for time travel. Just what we needed." "Yeah, they're here to fix the timeline or something." "Very official, very ominous," Ludo continued, his tone flippant as ever. "But they seem more bureaucratic than homicidal, so that's nice." "Wonderful," Nerys replied dryly. "Any idea how we can reason with these Squidward time cops?" "Not yet, but I was thinking maybe we could offer them a cup of recycled air and a stern talking to," Ludo suggested. Get back up here. We need a plan before they decide we're the cosmic equivalent of litterbugs, Nerys said. As Ludo and his team made their way back, the command deck felt more like the eye of a storm than a hub of operations. The crew gathered around, each looking to their captain for answers she didn't have. All right, listen up, Nerys said, her voice carrying the weight of too many sleepless nights. We're dealing with chronarchs who seem hell-bent on rewriting our timeline. We need to figure out what that future message meant and how to stop these bastards from turning us into a historical footnote. How do we even start? Marnie asked, her expression one of skepticism mixed with reluctant hope. We start by figuring out why the hell they're so interested in us, Nerys replied. Ludo, any insights from your new pals? Ludo shrugged, wiping a smear of grease from his cheek. Only that they've got a thing for temporal accuracy. Maybe they think we're about to do something that screws up their plans. Or maybe we're already screwing up their plans just by existing, Sam added, his voice tinged with the kind of nihilism that suggested he'd given up on the universe having any sense. Either way, we need to get ahead of this, Nerys said. Jane, keep working on that message. See if there's anything we missed. On it, Captain, Jane replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard like a pianist on a deadline. As the crew scattered, Ludo lingered, his expression thoughtful. You think we can actually fix this, Cap? Nerys sighed, her gaze drifting to the stars beyond the viewport. I don't know, Ludo. But we sure as hell have to try, because if we don't, I have a feeling the universe is going to have the last laugh. With that, the Horizon arc carried on through the stars, a ship full of misfits and dreamers, each holding onto the hope that they could outsmart fate itself. And if they couldn't, well, they'd at least give it a run for its money. The Horizon arc, a shining example of why you should never trust a sales pitch about lightly used spacecraft, was rattling like a tin can in the wind. The crew was as usual, knee-deep in problems, and if there was one thing they were experts at, it was handling catastrophe while maintaining a sense of humor that could make a funeral director smile. On the command deck, Nerys Quaid was losing a staring match with a particularly stubborn display screen. The words temporal displacement flashed in bright red, like a toddler throwing a tantrum. Well, that's just fantastic, she muttered, as if the ship cared. Jane Aiko, trying to make sense of the anomaly data, sighed dramatically. You ever feel like we're just bugs under some cosmic kid's magnifying glass? Daily, Nerys replied, drumming her fingers. I'd complain, but you know, vacuum of space and all that. Meanwhile, Ludo Vex was playing his favorite game. How many useless tools can I carry before I look like a pack mule? It wasn't a fun game, but it was the only one they had. Ever get the feeling these chronarchs are just screwing with us for giggles? He asked, handing a wrench to Sam, who looked about as confident as a fish on a bicycle. Wouldn't be the first time aliens decided to play God, Jane said, not looking up from her screen. Though I gotta admit, the squids with spreadsheets motif is new. The only thing worse than an alien with a god complex is one with an agenda, Nerys added, her gaze fixed on the stars outside. They were supposed to be guiding lights, but right now they felt more like a jury. Down in the bowels of the ship, a new player entered the fray. Ivo, the navigator, who had the perpetually confused look of a man who'd been handed a Rubik's Cube and told it was a map. Captain, I've got some ideas on how we might track these chronarchs. You know, assuming they haven't already rewritten us into potato farmers in the Middle Ages. Spill it, Ivo, Nerys said, gesturing for him to continue as she tried to ignore the ominous creaking coming from somewhere behind her. Well, I was thinking, if they're messing with time, maybe we can track the shifts by looking at the gravitational distortions they cause. Kind of like finding the ripples in a pond after you've chucked a stone in. And how do you propose we do that? Nerys asked, intrigued despite herself. Ivo rubbed the back of his neck, glancing at the cobbled-together mess that was their navigation array. We rig up the sensors to detect the distortions. Or, you know, hope really hard while crossing our fingers. Sounds like a plan, Ludo deadpanned. I mean, it's not like we've got any better ideas. Better to try and fail than sit around waiting for the universe to kick us in the shins, Nerys decided, nodding to Ivo. Get on it. We need all the info we can gather before those tentacle heads come back. On it, Captain, Ivo said, scuttling off like a man with a mission, which for once he actually was. As Ivo scrambled to make sense of the ship's ancient and slightly homicidal systems, Mara, the linguist who seemed to have a personal vendetta against sensible haircuts, was busy translating the alien messages they'd intercepted. Her station looked like a tornado had blown through a library and decided to stay. "How's the decoding going, Mara?" Nerys asked, watching as Mara scribbled notes like her pen was on fire. Like trying to read Shakespeare with a hangover, Mara grumbled. "The Chronarchs have a language that makes a black hole seem straightforward, but I've picked up on some key phrases. Mostly about timelines, violations, and something that sounds suspiciously like obliteration." "Well, that's encouraging," Ludo said, leaning over her shoulder. "Anything useful in there, or are we just confirming our doom?" "Still working on that part," Mara replied, chewing on the end of her pen. "But I think there might be a way to confuse their systems. If we can mimic their signals, we might delay them long enough to figure out a real plan." "Sounds risky," Nerys said, considering. "But since when has that stopped us? If we pull it off, we might get enough time to actually fix something on this flying junkyard," Mara said, her eyes lighting up with the kind of dangerous enthusiasm usually reserved for mad scientists and children with fireworks. "All right, Mara. Work with Ivo. If you can give us a fighting chance to dodge their next move, I'll buy you a drink when this is all over." "Hell, I'll buy everyone a drink." "Deal," Mara said, already brainstorming ways to make a ragtag crew of misfits sound like temporal geniuses. As the crew scattered to their tasks, the Horizon Arc continued its slow, creaky journey through the stars. Nerys watched them go, feeling a strange mix of pride and existential dread. They were a mess, but they were her mess, and if anyone could pull off a miracle, it was this lot. The ship hiccuped, an affectionate term for what was probably a catastrophic systems failure, but Nerys just gritted her teeth. "Not today, you rust bucket," she muttered, heading towards the engine room where things were likely to be both explosive and incomprehensible. "Captain," Ludo said, falling into step beside her, "you think we're actually gonna make it out of this one, statistically?" "Probably not," Nerys replied, her voice dry as the Martian desert. "But then again, you're talking to a woman who once outran a pirate fleet in a ship held together with duct tape and prayers." "Guess that makes us lucky, then," Ludo said, with the kind of grin that suggested he still had a few tricks up his sleeve. "Or doomed," Nerys countered, but she couldn't help the smile tugging at her lips. In the engine room, chaos reigned supreme. It was a symphony of noise, with tools clanging and sparks flying, and somewhere in the corner, a very disgruntled engineer named Grint was swearing at a piece of machinery that had clearly offended him. "Everything under control, Grint?" Nerys asked, ducking as something exploded in a shower of sparks behind her. "If by under control you mean on the verge of catastrophic meltdown, then sure," he replied, wiping a smear of grease off his face with an equally greasy rag. "What's the plan, Cap? We're going to throw a wrench in the Chronarch's works." "Figuratively this time," Nerys said, explaining the plan Mara and Ivo were working on. "Sounds like a long shot," Grint said, eyeing a valve that was hissing angrily. "But then again, we've been living on borrowed time since day one." "Exactly. And if it doesn't work, at least we'll go down fighting," Nerys said, giving him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Keep this heap of bolts together until then, will you?" "I'll do my best, Captain. But no promises," Grint replied with a grin that would have been charming if it wasn't so manic. As Nerys made her way back to the command deck, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were teetering on the edge of something big. Maybe it was insanity, maybe it was genius, or maybe it was just the normal state of being on the Horizon Arc. Either way, they'd find out soon enough. Back on the deck, Jane was still wrestling with Data, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Captain, I think I've found something," she said, looking up as Nerys entered. "There's a pattern to the anomalies. They're happening in intervals, like someone hitting the snooze button on a cosmic alarm clock. Can we use that to predict the next one?" Nerys asked, leaning over her shoulder. "I think so. If we time it right, we might be able to avoid the worst of it," Jane said, her voice tinged with hopeful skepticism. "Good work, Jane. Let's see if we can turn this ship around," literally, Nerys said, feeling the first stirrings of optimism she'd had in days. As the crew scrambled to implement their plan, the Horizon Ark felt more alive than it had in years. Sure, it was still a rusting hulk held together with hope and stubbornness, but it was their hulk, and they were determined to see it through. When the next anomaly hit, they were ready. The ship shuddered and groaned, but it held together, riding the wave like a surfer on a particularly angry ocean. "Looks like your plan worked, Ivo," Nerys said, clapping him on the back as the crew broke into relieved laughter. "Let's not celebrate just yet," Ivo said, breathless but grinning. "There's still a lot that can go wrong, true, but for once we might have the upper hand," Nerys replied, feeling the weight of the universe lift just a little. As the Horizon Ark continued its journey, the crew knew they still had a long way to go. The Chronarchs were out there, lurking in the shadows, but for now, the humans were one step ahead, and that was enough to keep them going. "Hey, Nerys," Ludo said as they watched the stars slip by. "Think we'll ever get a break?" "Probably not," Nerys replied with a chuckle. "But then again, who wants an easy life? Not us, that's for sure," Ludo said, shaking his head. "Here's to impossible odds and improbable victories." To the Horizon Ark, Nerys agreed, raising an imaginary glass. "May she stay in one piece long enough for us to tell this story to someone who'll actually believe it." With that, they turned their attention back to the task at hand, ready to face whatever the universe threw their way next. Because that's what humans do: survive, adapt, and occasionally, just occasionally, win against cosmic odds. The Horizon Ark groaned like an old drunkard settling into a bar stool, a sound that implied it was just as likely to collapse as it was to order another round. Nerys Quaid, with the worn command deck as her makeshift throne, surveyed her ragtag crew. They were in the deep end now, swirling around in a temporal whirlpool, and the Chronarchs were doing their best to pull the plug. "All right, team," Nerys began, her voice carrying a mixture of resignation and defiance. "Those tentacle heads are getting serious. They're trying to create a paradox that'll erase humanity from the future. So, no pressure." "Great," Ludo Vex muttered, fiddling with a multimeter like it was a Rubik's Cube. "Nothing like a cosmic erasure to get your blood pumping." Jane Aiko, elbows deep in anomaly data, let out a theatrical sigh that could have powered the ship's engines. As if being stuck on this space coffin wasn't bad enough. "Now we have to babysit the universe's timeline too. Hey, if it makes you feel any better, maybe we won't have to worry about taxes once we're erased," Nerys quipped, trying to lighten the mood with gallows humor. It failed spectacularly. Marnie, the human equivalent of an immovable object, crossed her arms with a scowl that could vaporize small planets. "I'd rather face an army than deal with time-traveling aliens." "At least with an army you know where the bullets are coming from, Captain," Ivo piped up, still looking like a fish asked to solve calculus, but with the spark of an idea in his eyes. "What if we could manipulate the same temporal ripples they're using? We might be able to toss a spanner in their works." "Or get shredded into cosmic spaghetti," Ludo interjected. "But hey, I love pasta, so why not?" Despite the flippant remarks, there was a kernel of hope in Ivo's proposal. Nerys turned to her crew with a smile that was more like a grimace. "All right, Ivo, you and Mara see if you can make their tech our tech, and try not to blow us all to kingdom come, yeah?" Grumbling assent, the crew scattered to their stations, each of them doing their best impersonation of a professional. Nerys watched them go, feeling the weight of the ship's impending doom pressing down like an overenthusiastic aunt at a family reunion. Meanwhile, Ludo was engaged in a heated discussion with the ship's AI, a relic of software with the personality of a particularly pedantic librarian. For the last time, I know it's not protocol to reroute power from life support to the forward sensors, Ludo barked. But since when have we followed protocol anyway? If we fry, I'm haunting you, Sam, the previously wrenchless wonder, said from the corner, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Just so you know, ghost or no ghost, I'll take my chances, Ludo replied, throwing caution and probably safety regulations to the solar winds. Besides, without those sensors, we're flying blind into a temporal blender. As the ship continued its creaky voyage, a sudden clang followed by a hiss announced Grint, the beleaguered engineer, entering the command deck. News from the belly of the beast, he declared, wiping a smudge of oil from his forehead. We've managed to coax a few more joules out of the generators, enough to keep us from immediate doom at least. Music to my ears, Nerys replied, nodding with relief. Now if only those chronarchs could get the memo. Down in the mess of wires and screens that was Mara's station, she and Ivo were deep in the kind of technobabble that could make even the most ardent sci-fi fans' head spin. If we mimic their signal, we might be able to create a feedback loop, Mara was explaining, her hands moving like an orchestra conductor. So what, we make them trip over their own laces? Ivo asked, trying to keep up. More like send them a nasty shock when they try to mess with us, Mara clarified, a dangerous glint in her eye. Think of it as a temporal joy buzzer. Surprise. Well, I'm all for shocking the hell out of them, Nerys interjected, having caught the last of their exchange. As long as we don't end up shocking ourselves into an early grave. Iors ticked by, the ship's creaks and groans a constant reminder of their precarious situation. Everyone was working at a frenetic pace, the air thick with tension and the scent of mild panic. Suddenly, the ship shuddered violently, throwing everyone off balance. The display screen, which had been stubbornly flashing temporal displacement, now screamed a chorus of alerts as if declaring a cataclysmic opera. Marnie slammed a fist on the console, effectively silencing it. Enough of your lip, she growled at the screen as if it were a rebellious teenager. We've got incoming, Jane shouted above the din, her fingers flying over the controls. Looks like the chronarchs aren't waiting for an invitation. Nerys felt a rush of adrenaline. It was the kind of thrill that reminded her she was still alive for now. Everyone to battle stations. Let's show these bastards what human ingenuity looks like when it's backed into a corner. As the crew snapped into action, the Horizon Ark prepared to meet its fate head-on, like a boxer who's too stubborn to stay down for the count. The ship might have been cobbled together from spare parts and prayers, but with this crew it had heart. A rusty, unreliable heart, but a heart nonetheless. The lights flickered ominously as electric arcs crackled through exposed wires, casting eerie shadows that danced across the command deck. It was as if the universe itself was mocking their futile attempts to stay alive. I'm seeing temporal distortions all over the place, Ivo reported, his voice barely masking his excitement. It's like a storm, and we're right in the middle of it. Then we better start paddling, Nerys replied, looking at her crew with a mix of hope and desperation. Activate that feedback loop, Mara. Time to mess up their timeline. Here goes everything, Mara said, fingers flying across the console with the kind of reckless abandon usually reserved for last-ditch efforts. The ship groaned again, louder this time, as if protesting the abuse it was being subjected to. The Horizon Ark lurched as reality itself seemed to bend, a nausea-inducing ripple that made everyone instinctively clutch at their seats. If we survive this, I'm never complaining about turbulence again, Ludo muttered, his knuckles white against the console. On the display screen, a new message began flashing, overlaying the temporal displacement warning. It read, "Anomaly feedback initiated." Nerys held her breath, waiting for the universe to decide whether it would be kind or cruel today. The ship shuddered once more, then settled into a steady hum. A palpable tension lifted, though not entirely, as if the universe had decided to give them a temporary reprieve. For now. Did it work? Sam asked, his voice an octave higher than usual. We're still here, Nuri said, more to reassure herself than anyone else. That's a start. We've disrupted their communications, Jane reported, a rare smile breaking her usually stoic expression. They're scrambling. Looks like they didn't expect us to hit back. Bet they won't see that coming, Marnie added, her own grin more feral than friendly. Don't get too cocky, Ivo warned, though he couldn't hide the satisfaction in his voice. They'll regroup and they'll come at us twice as hard. Good, Nuri said, standing tall despite the chaos around her. Let them try. We're not going down without a fight. As the crew settled back into the semblance of normalcy, albeit a version where the threat of annihilation loomed large, there was a newfound energy on the ship. They had struck a blow, however small, against an enemy that seemed insurmountable. It was a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak universe, like finding a four-leaf clover in a field of weeds. But the reprieve was short-lived. The ship's sensors blared once more, signaling the Chronarchs weren't done playing their game. Brace yourselves, Nuri called out, as the reality of their situation came crashing back. Round 2 is here. As the ship's system strained under the looming threat, the crew of the Horizon Ark prepared for the next wave, knowing it could be their last. But they were ready to face it, armed with nothing but their determination and a few ill-advised plans. Here's to impossible odds, Ludo said, echoing their earlier toast as they steeled themselves against the coming storm. Let's give them hell. And as the Horizon Ark continued to hurtle through space, its crew kept their eyes on the stars, ready to fight against the inevitable, determined to carve out a future against all odds. Because if there was one thing humans were good at, it was surviving when the universe seemed set on erasing them from the timeline. The Horizon Ark groaned again, a sound like a dying whale echoing through the corridors. Nuri's Quaid slumped back in her chair, the command deck feeling more like a sinking ship than the control room of a fleet-saving ark. Is it just me, or is this bucket getting louder? She asked, mostly to herself. Can't blame it, Ludovex replied, not looking up from his multimeter, which he was fiddling with as if it might unlock the secrets of the universe. If I was held together by duct tape and good intentions, I'd wail too. Jane Aiko was hunched over a console, her eyes scanning anomaly data as if staring hard enough might fix things. We've got new readings, Captain, she announced, her voice carrying the kind of bad news tone you'd used to say the dog threw up on the carpet again. Temporal distortions are spiking. If this keeps up, we might just time travel back to the Stone Age. Well, I always wanted to meet a dinosaur, Nuri said dryly, though it was hard to find humor in a situation that was spiraling faster than a toilet flushed in zero gravity. The lights flickered again, the ship's system straining under the temporal chaos surrounding them. This doesn't look good, Sam muttered, his forehead creased with worry. He glanced at Ludo, who seemed too absorbed in his gadget to notice the impending doom. Good, Ludo said, still focused on his multimeter. I'd hate for everything to look rosy and ruin my mood. Marnie, who had been silently assessing the damage like a judge at a particularly disappointing science fair, finally spoke. If we lose life support, we're done. And not in the let's just move to another room kind of done. Nothing like a little oxygen deprivation to spice up a dull Tuesday, Nuri's quipped, pushing herself to her feet. All right, folks, let's not panic. Remember, we've been through worse. When? Ivo asked, genuinely curious. On my last birthday when they forgot the cake, she replied, trying to maintain her trademark sarcasm despite the gravity of their predicament. Suddenly, the air felt thinner, and not just because of the lack of jokes. A klaxon blared, announcing a breach in life support systems. Sector 3's gone dark, Jane reported, her fingers dancing across her console like it might suddenly spit out a miracle. We've lost life support in that area. Great, Nuri said, rubbing at her temples. Add asphyxiation to today's list of potential demises. Sam looked like he was about to hyperventilate, which was ironic given the circumstances. What do we do? Simple, Ludo said, setting his multimeter down with the kind of finality usually reserved for laying down a royal flush. "We die." But not quietly. Nerys glared at him, though he wasn't entirely wrong. "We're not giving up, not yet. Jane, can we reroute power from somewhere else?" "Already tried," Jane replied, frustration evident in her voice. "Chronarch's tech is jamming our systems. It's like trying to run a marathon with your shoelaces tied." "Ivo," Nerys said, turning to the young technician who was already neck-deep in a tangle of wires. "Tell me we have options." "Well, we could try to reverse their signal disruption," Ivo suggested, though his voice carried the uncertainty of a man suggesting a shortcut through a haunted forest. "Do it," she ordered, because what else could they do? "Everyone else keep this ship running. We're not done yet." The crew leapt into action, though the energy was more akin to a group of demoralized soldiers than a crack team. As Ivo and Mara worked their magic, they could feel the ship slipping further into decay, the life support systems failing like a tired old man needing a new pacemaker. "Captain," Grint's voice crackled over the intercom, sounding like he was speaking through a mouthful of gravel. "Generators are straining. We can't keep this up forever." "Good thing I wasn't planning on eternity," Nerys replied, though her attempt at levity was lost in the grim reality bearing down on them. Marnie was back at her post, her expression a mix of determination and resignation. "Feels like we're trying to patch a sinking ship with tissue paper." "Hey, it's not just any tissue paper," Ludo retorted, tapping the console with mock pride. "It's premium, two-ply." As if the universe was done with their banter, the ship shuddered violently, another temporal wave passing through. It was like being on a roller coaster designed by a madman, each loop in turn potentially their last. Nerys steadied herself, thinking of the thousands of souls they were supposed to save, the promise of a future that felt as likely as finding a unicorn in their cargo bay. "Come on, Horizon Arc," she muttered. "Don't fail us now." Jane's console beeped, a sound as welcome as a dentist's drill. "New readings," she said, though her face was a mask of exhaustion. "Chronarchs are moving in. They know we're vulnerable." "Of course they do," Nerys said, feeling the weight of inevitability settle on her shoulders. "They've been planning this longer than we've been alive." "Longer than the ship's been in service, that's for sure," Ludo said, shaking his head. "And that's saying something." Ivo's hands were a blur over the control panel, his expression a mix of frantic concentration and hope. "We've got a partial lock on their signal, if I can just—" The ship jolted again, cutting him off. More lights flickered, the deck groaning under the strain. Even the ship seemed to realize how close they were to the end. "How bad is it?" Nerys asked, though she didn't need a detailed report to know they were up the proverbial creek without a paddle. "Take the worst scenario you can imagine," Jane said, her tone as dry as a desert. "Multiply it by 10. "Fantastic," Nerys replied, sarcasm dripping from her words like honey. "I always wanted to be part of a really dramatic last stand." Ludo chuckled, a mirthless sound. "Look on the bright side, Captain. If we go, at least we won't have to deal with these Chronarch jerks anymore." "Comforting," Marnie said, though her voice was flat. She stared at the display screen, which continued to flash warnings like a hyperactive disco ball. "We can't hold them off forever." "No, we can't," Nerys agreed, swallowing the lump in her throat. "But we can go down swinging." Amidst the chaos, the crew clung to their tasks, the sense of camaraderie stronger than their fear. Together, they were determined to make their stand, to fight until the very end, even as the odds stacked higher than the pile of junk parts that kept their ship running. "We're getting closer," Ivo said, determination lacing his words. "Just a little more time." "Time's the one thing we don't have," Jane replied, casting a wary eye at the failing systems. "Well, I never was good with deadlines," Nerys said with a shrug, hiding the terror she felt with bravado. "But I'm damn good at improvising." The Horizon Arc shuddered once more, the universe itself seemingly conspiring against them. As the crew worked feverishly to hold back the inevitable, it was clear this was their darkest hour. But even in the blackest night, there was a flicker of light, a sliver of hope that they might somehow make it through. "All systems are critical," Sam reported, his voice cracked with tension. If we don't stabilize soon, we will, Nerys cut him off, more forcefully than she intended. We have to. And so they fought on, each second a testament to their resilience, to their refusal to surrender. As the Chronarchs closed in and their systems faltered, the crew of the Horizon Ark stood their ground, knowing that even if they were outmatched, they were not yet out of the fight. "Let's give them hell, one last time," Nerys said, standing at the helm with a steely determination in her eyes. As the ship raced towards its uncertain fate, the crew of the Horizon Ark held on, each of them knowing that in the end, they might not make it out alive. But they weren't about to let that stop them. Not just yet. And if the universe had anything to say about it, they were ready to fight back with everything they had. Because that's what humans did best. Survive against impossible odds, with a little gallows humor thrown in for good measure. The Horizon Ark groaned like an arthritic giant as it rolled through another wave of temporal distortion, each jolt a reminder of how close they were to becoming space debris. On the command deck, Captain Nerys Quaid stood surrounded by the chaos of her crew, each member a cog in a machine threatening to fall apart at any moment. "Someone get me a status update," Nerys barked, her tone as sharp as a broken bottle. "And make it snappy. I've got a date with a black hole and don't want to be late. Life support's hanging by a thread," Marnie replied, her voice carrying the weight of someone who knew exactly how little thread they had left, and not the fashionable kind. "Good," Nerys said, forcing a grin. "Would hate for our situation to be too comfortable." "Captain," Ludo Vex said, his eyes glued to his multimeter like a gambler on a slot machine. "I think I've got an idea." Everyone turned to look at him, which said more about their desperation than their faith in his plan. "Please, enlighten us, O wise one," Nerys said, folding her arms. "What harebrained scheme have you cooked up this time?" Ludo glanced up, a crooked smile playing on his lips. "We create our own paradoxes." Jane Aiko's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "What, like making the universe implode faster?" "Not quite," Ludo said, undeterred. "If we can generate controlled paradoxes, it might throw off the Chronarch's tech long enough for us to punch a hole in their jamming signal." Nerys raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do we do that without blowing ourselves to kingdom come?" "Well," Ludo began, scratching his chin, "we'd need to harness the warp core's energy, reroute it through the temporal stabilizers, and then—" "Hold up," Sam interrupted, his voice shaking slightly. "Won't that destabilize the entire ship?" "Only if done wrong," Ludo admitted, shrugging like a kid caught sneaking cookies. "But I've got a good feeling about this one." "Famous last words," Jane muttered, returning her focus to her console. "But it might be our only shot." "We're not exactly spoilt for choices here," Nerys said, sighing. "All right, Vex, you've got the green light, make your paradoxes. And if it all goes sideways, I'll haunt you in the afterlife." "Deal," Ludo said, already diving into his work with the zeal of a mad scientist. As Ludo got to work, the rest of the crew moved to support his efforts, their movements a mixture of frantic energy and resigned acceptance. This was their Hail Mary, their last-ditch attempt to stave off the inevitable. "Captain," Ivo called out, his voice strained but hopeful. "I'm syncing with Ludo's system now. We might be able to amplify the signal disruption." "Good," Nerys replied, nodding. "Let's make the Chronarchs regret ever picking a fight with us." The ship shuddered again, a reminder that it was as tired of this nonsense as they were. The Horizon Ark had seen better days, but then again, so had they all. "Generators are still straining," Grint reported over the intercom, sounding like he was delivering a eulogy. "We won't last much longer at this rate." "Then let's make it count," Nerys said, her voice carrying the kind of steely resolve usually reserved for action heroes and particularly stubborn mules. "How's it coming, Ludo?" Jane asked, not looking up from her console. "Like trying to knit a sweater with spaghetti," he replied, his hands a blur over the control panel. "But we're getting there." "Let's hope it's not al dente," Sam quipped, though his smile was more of a grimace. "All right, people," Nerys said, clapping her hands together. "This is it. Either we pull this off or we're the next addition to the galaxy's junkyard." Always wanted to be famous, Ludo muttered, adjusting a few dials. Even if it's only for being an idiot. With a final flourish, he hit the console, and the ship hummed ominously as it began to execute the plan. The lights flickered, the deck trembled, and somewhere in the distance, the horizon arc itself seemed to hold its breath. "Temporal stabilizers engaged," Ivo announced, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. "We're starting to see interference with the Chronarch signal." "Good," Nerys said, her eyes fixed on the display screen. "Let's give those bastards a taste of chaos." As the paradoxes began to take effect, the ship's systems flickered unpredictably, each surge of energy a potential death knell. But amid the chaos, there was hope, a glimmer of resilience that had kept them alive this long. "Signal disruption detected," Jane reported, her voice tinged with cautious optimism. "It's working." "It's a miracle," Sam breathed, visibly relaxing for the first time all day. "I'll believe that when I see angels," Marnie grumbled, though a small smile tugged at her lips. "Angels are overrated," Ludo said, his focus unwavering. "I'd settle for a working air conditioning unit." "Stay sharp, everyone," Nerys warned, though she couldn't help but feel a swell of pride for her crew. This isn't over yet. The Horizon Arc continued its perilous journey, each second a tightrope walk between salvation and oblivion. But as Ludo and Ivo worked their magic, the odds slowly began to tip in their favor. "Chronarchs are pulling back," Jane said, an edge of disbelief in her voice. "Their systems can't handle the paradoxes." "What, did they not bring enough duct tape?" Ludo quipped, eyes still glued to his multimeter. "Looks like we've bought ourselves some breathing room," Nerys said, allowing herself a brief moment of relief. "Let's make the most of it." Despite the chaos around them, the crew of the Horizon Arc held firm, each member a testament to human stubbornness and ingenuity. Their situation was still dire, but they weren't done fighting, not by a long shot. "Can we stabilize the ship?" Marnie asked, glancing at Nerys. "Depends," Ludo said, fingers dancing over the controls. "How much do you like improvisation?" "I'm more of a stick-to-the-plan kind of gal," Marnie replied dryly. "Then you're gonna love this," Ludo said, grinning like a maniac. "Hang on to your hats." As the Horizon Arc limped its way through the temporal distortions, the crew settled into a rhythm, their camaraderie a bulwark against the uncertainty of their fate. "How's that for human ingenuity?" Ivo said, his voice filled with wonder and exhaustion. "Not bad for a bunch of misfits," Nerys replied, her tone equal parts pride and sarcasm. The ship shuddered once more, but this time it felt different, less like the death throes of a dying beast and more like the stubborn resilience of a cornered animal refusing to lie down. "Keep it steady, folks," Nerys said, taking a deep breath. "We're not out of the woods yet. More like we're deep in the muck," Ludo added, not missing a beat. As the Horizon Arc continued its precarious journey, the crew clung to their tasks, their determination a beacon in the darkness. They might not have been out of the woods, but they'd managed to carve a path through it, even if it was lined with duct tape and good intentions. The ship groaned again, a final protest against its own limitations, but for now they had a fighting chance. And sometimes in the depths of space, a fighting chance was all you needed. "Stay focused," Nerys said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "We're not done yet." "Never are," Jane replied, a ghost of a smile on her lips. Together, they worked tirelessly to hold back the tide, knowing that even as the odds loomed large, they were not alone. Their ship was battered, their resources strained, but their spirit remained unbroken. As the final pieces of Ludo's plan clicked into place, the crew of the Horizon Arc braced themselves for whatever came next. They were standing on the precipice, the edge of the unknown, but they were ready to face it with everything they had. "Whatever happens," Nerys said, her gaze sweeping over her crew, "I couldn't have asked for a better team." "And we couldn't have asked for a better captain," Ludo replied, grinning as he made the last adjustments. Their path was fraught with peril, their future uncertain, but as the Horizon Arc raced towards its destiny, they knew one thing for sure. They were in this together, come hell or high water. And if the universe had any objections, well, it was just going to have to deal with it. The Horizon Arc groaned like an old man getting out of bed. Nerys Quaid, captain of this barely floating heap of metal, stood on the command deck, feeling every creak and shudder as if it were her own bones protesting against the strain. The display screen, ever the harbinger of doom, continued to flash temporal displacement in a relentless loop that could only be described as blindingly annoying. "All right, Ludo," she said, not quite yelling but loud enough to surpass the ship's incessant whining. "You've got your paradoxes. What's next on this misguided tour of genius?" Ludo Vex, the crew's resident mad scientist and paradox enthusiast, peered over his multimeter like it held the secrets of the universe, or at least their survival. "We're going to give the Chronarchs a temporal headache they won't forget. Assuming they have heads," Jane Aiko remarked dryly, never one to miss an opportunity for a deadpan quip. She was huddled over her console as if it might sprout legs and run away. "Details," Ludo replied, waving a hand dismissively. "Right now, we need to amplify these paradoxes. They're like wine, get better with age, but we don't have that luxury." Ivo, ever the curious one, leaned over the panel, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You're saying we're going to outwit a technically advanced alien species using temporal screw-ups?" "Pretty much," Ludo grinned. "We're turning their own complexity against them. Simple chaos for the win." "Sounds like my love life," Sam muttered, earning a smirk from Marnie, who was, as usual, dealing with the ship's life support system like a beleaguered babysitter. "Focus, people," Nerys snapped, though her tone carried a grudging admiration. "This is where we make our stand, or float. Or whatever passes for heroics in space." The ship shivered again, the lights flickering as if undecided about continuing their service. Somewhere in the bowels of the vessel, an ominous clunk echoed, a mechanical shrug of indifference. "Generators are holding barely," came Grint's voice over the intercom, a background hum of resignation. "But they've got about as much juice as a solar calculator in a blackout." "Fantastic," Nerys said. "Let's get this over with before we all end up as space dust." Ludo nodded, his fingers flying over the controls like they were keys of a particularly temperamental piano. "Ivo, Jane, on my mark, initiate the temporal amplifiers. We're going to make sure those Chronarchs regret ever underestimating good old human stubbornness." "You mean stupidity," Jane corrected, a hint of a smile playing on her lips, "but I'll allow it." "Ready when you are, Ludo," Ivo confirmed, his voice tinged with both excitement and fear, a cocktail of emotions that had become all too familiar. The seconds ticked by with the kind of tension that could only be sliced with a space-grade laser cutter. Nerys watched the crew, their faces set in grim determination, and felt a surge of pride. They might have been dysfunctional, mismatched, and occasionally prone to bickering, but they were hers. "On my count," Ludo announced, eyes gleaming with the fervor of a man about to pull off the impossible. 3, 2, 1, now." Ivo and Jane hit their respective panels simultaneously, the ship shuddering as if it had been punched by the cosmic fist of irony. The paradoxes, crafted from the ship's own temporal instability, surged through the systems, sending waves of distortion that rippled out into the void. "Temporal amplifiers are live," Ivo reported, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of alarms and klaxons that had decided to join the party. "Feedback's insane," Jane added, wrestling with her console, "like trying to wrestle a bear on caffeine." "Keep it steady," Ludo shouted, adjusting furiously. "The Chronarch systems won't know what hit them." As if on cue, the command deck screens flickered, the once-blocked radar now revealing a faint but definite sign of the Chronarch vessels pulling back, their interference finally breached by human ingenuity, or madness, depending on how you saw it. "We've got a breach in their signal," Nerys grinned, more than a little satisfaction in her voice. "Looks like they can't handle the paradoxes. Or they just hate chaos as much as I hate paperwork," Marnie suggested, a glimmer of hope in her usually sarcastic tone. Either way, it's working, Sam said, wiping a hand across his brow. We're actually holding them off. Don't jinx it, Jane warned, casting him a look that could freeze a sun. The horizon arc bucked and swayed, but for the first time in what felt like eternity, the ship's movements felt more like rebellion than resignation. The paradoxes, chaotic as they were, had given them an edge, a fighting chance against an enemy that seemed all but insurmountable mere moments ago. Chronarchs are hesitating, Jane announced, her fingers dancing over the keys as she monitored the shifting data. They're not used to things not going their way. Welcome to life, Ludo said, shaking his head. It's unpredictable, annoying, and sometimes it kicks you in the teeth. The crew pressed on, their collective focus narrowing on the task at hand. The temporal storm they'd unleashed was a double-edged sword, and they needed to wield it carefully to avoid cutting themselves in the process. "How's life support?" Nerys called over to Marnie, who was elbow-deep in wires and circuits. "Still on life support," she quipped, though there was a hint of genuine relief in her voice. "But breathing." "Good enough for me," Nerys replied, turning her attention back to the battle at hand. "Let's make sure it stays that way." As the minutes passed, the crew settled into a rhythm, their actions a blend of instinct and desperation. The ship groaned and protested, but it didn't buckle, didn't give in. They were riding the chaos, harnessing the paradoxes to force the Chronarchs into retreat. "Looks like they're pulling back," Ivo observed, his tone cautiously optimistic. "We might have actually done it." "Never doubted it for a second," Ludo chimed in, although his earlier nervous fidgeting told a different story. "Nice to see confidence is catching," Jane remarked, unable to resist a smirk. "All right, folks," Nerys said, her voice cutting through the noise. "We've given them something to think about. Now let's make sure we get out of this in one piece." The ship's systems were stabilizing, the alarms quieting like chastised children. The paradoxes had done their job, confusing and disrupting the Chronarchs long enough to give the horizon arc the edge it desperately needed. "Path is clear," Sam confirmed, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "We've actually got a shot at getting out of here." "Not bad for a bunch of misfits," Ludo said, a grin spreading across his face. "We've outwitted the universe's sticklers for order." "An accomplishment worthy of a medal," Jane quipped, though her eyes shone with unabashed pride. Nerys looked around at her crew, at the faces that had become more than just colleagues in the midst of chaos. They were a family, dysfunctional and argumentative, but unyielding in the face of the absurdity the universe threw their way. "Once we're clear," Nerys began, the hint of a smile tugging at her lips, "I'm taking a long vacation, maybe somewhere that doesn't involve temporal anomalies or homicidal aliens." "Good luck finding that," Marnie chuckled, shaking her head. "I hear it's a seller's market." The ship hummed beneath their feet, a reminder of the precarious nature of their existence. But for now, they had done the impossible, surviving against odds that had seemed insurmountable. "Let's get us out of here," Nerys said, taking her place at the helm. "And if the Chronarchs decide to follow, we'll just have to remind them why humans are the galaxy's most annoying tenants." With the path clear and the Chronarchs in retreat, the horizon arc plotted its course away from the chaos, leaving behind a trail of paradoxes, and a lesson to anyone who dared underestimate the ingenuity of humanity. As the stars stretched into streaks of light, the crew settled into their seats, exhaustion mingling with the sweet relief of survival. For now, they had bought themselves time, a commodity more precious than the most advanced technology. "Here's to paradoxes," Ludo said, raising an imaginary glass. "May they always work in our favor." "Next time I'm voting for a simpler plan," Jane replied, though her smile belied her words. The ship carried on, its battered frame a testament to its resilience and the stubborn spirit of its crew. They had faced the edge of oblivion and returned, a little worse for wear but undefeated. "Whatever comes next," Nerys said, her gaze sweeping over her crew, "we'll face it head-on. Together. And if the universe doesn't like it," Ivo added with a grin, "it can take a number and get in line." The horizon arc sailed through the stars, a symbol of defiance in a universe that rarely granted second chances. Against all odds, they had survived, and in that, they found a hope that burned brighter than any star. And to think, Nerys mused, settling back in her chair, all it took was a little chaos. A little, Sam laughed, shaking his head. Captain, I think we redefined the word. As the ship sailed into the unknown, the crew of the Horizon Ark knew one thing for certain. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they always had, with wits, resolve, and more than a little humor. After all, if you couldn't laugh at the darkness, what was the point in surviving it? The Horizon Ark cruised through space like it had something to prove, or perhaps like an elderly racer, puffing out its chest and hoping no one noticed the wheeze in its engines. The Chronarchs were a retreating speck, and the ship, for now, was mercifully quiet, if you didn't count the creaks, groans, and faint sounds of metal fatigue. Nerys Quaid stood on the command deck, surveying the aftermath of their victory. Well, maybe victory was too grand a term. Survival, perhaps. A grudging nod from fate that said, "Fine, you can live another day, but don't get cocky." "Systems check," Nerys asked, though she wasn't holding her breath for miracles. "Starboard thrusters are still dodgy," Ivo replied, tapping at his console with the enthusiasm of someone confronting a malfunctioning coffee machine. "But they're holding for now, like a toddler on a sugar rush. Life support." Nerys turned her attention to Marnie, who was neck-deep in the kind of wires that looked suspiciously like they'd been scavenged from someone's garage on Earth. "Stable if you like living on a knife edge," Marnie said, her fingers knotted around a spanner like it was a comforting childhood toy. "But stable is stable. Well, if we start suffocating, at least we'll go out knowing it was in style," Sam piped up, leaning back in his chair. "Heroic asphyxiation, a new trend." Jane chuckled, a sound more sardonic than joyful. "Great. Just what I always wanted on my gravestone." She died as she lived, starved of oxygen and sarcasm. Ludo was hunched over a mess of tangled cables, muttering to himself about temporal this and paradoxical that. He finally straightened up, a mad glint in his eyes that suggested maybe he'd finally cracked the code of the universe, or maybe he'd just gotten another truly terrible idea. "Those paradoxes," he said, gesturing wildly, "we could refine them, maybe weaponize them fully, turn them into the equivalent of an intergalactic whoopee cushion." Jane gave him a sidelong glance. "Because what the galaxy really needs is more chaos." Ludo shrugged, unapologetic. "Chaos keeps things interesting." "Sure, until someone loses an eye," Sam added, one eyebrow arching in mock warning. Nerys shook her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips despite the situation. It was always like this, a bunch of smartasses flirting with disaster. Yet here they were, still in one piece, more or less. "All right," she said, clapping her hands together. "Let's focus on getting this bucket of bolts back to something resembling operational. I'd rather not float through space waiting for the Chronarchs to change their minds." "We'll see what we can do," Marnie replied, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd become far too accustomed to miracles. "Wish we had a few more hands. Or tentacles," Ivo mused, attempting to untangle a mess of wires that looked like a robotic dreadlock. "Might be more efficient." The crew spread out, diving into their respective tasks. There was a rhythm to it now, a kind of tired determination that kept them going. They were survivors in a universe that had a nasty habit of chewing up anyone who dared to challenge its rules. "So," Ludo said, breaking the silence, "who's up for a round of what could possibly go wrong next?" Jane raised a hand, smirking. "I vote for spontaneous combustion. We haven't had that one yet. Or maybe the toilets decide they're done taking our crap," Sam added, straight-faced. "Mutiny of the sanitation system." Nerys sighed, but it was the kind of sigh that came with a resigned acceptance. "Let's just focus on keeping everything working, shall we? I'm not ready to be space compost." The Horizon Ark shuddered slightly, as if in agreement. The ship had its quirks, but it had a way of hanging on, just like its crew. In the quiet moments, as the team worked to patch up the ship's wounded pride, Nerys felt a kinship with the old bucket of bolts. Held together by duct tape, good intentions, and the sheer stubbornness of those aboard her. "Hey, Cap," Marnie called out, "what do you think the Chronarchs are doing right now?" Nerys thought for a moment, a wicked grin spreading across her face. "Probably having an existential crisis about how they got outsmarted by a bunch of meatbags." "Ah, the classic alien dilemma," Ivo chuckled, "realizing humans are too stupid to follow the rules of physics." "Or life," Jane added, twisting a panel back into place. "We're not picky." Time passed with the comforting clatter of repairs, punctuated by the occasional curse as someone accidentally shocked themselves or dropped a tool. Eventually, the ship felt, if not whole, then at least a little less like it was about to come apart at the seams. "All right," Ludo said, standing back from a console with the satisfaction of a mad scientist whose experiment hadn't exploded. "I think we've got ourselves a fighting chance again." "Great," Nerys replied, looking around at her crew. "Because next time we face those Chronarchs, I'd like to be the ones doing the chasing." "Sounds like a plan," Sam said, wiping grease from his hands. "Just give me a heads up so I can pack my running shoes." Jane rolled her eyes. "You'll need more than shoes, Sam." "Try a miracle." The crew laughed, a sound that carried with it the weight of their ordeal. It was the laughter of relief of people who had stared down oblivion and lived to tell the tale, at least for now. "So what do we do once we get somewhere?" Ivo asked, leaning against the console. "Assuming we don't get blown to bits first." Nerys considered the question, a thoughtful look crossing her face. "Maybe we take a break. Find a nice, quiet asteroid to park on." "With no Chronarchs," Jane interjected. "And definitely no temporal anomalies. Or homicidal toilets," Sam added, grinning. "Sounds like paradise," Marnie said, her voice carrying a wistful note. "Too bad such a place doesn't exist." "But if it did," Ludo said, a spark of mischief in his eyes, "we'd probably ruin it." "And that's why I love this crew," Nerys announced, her voice filled with a fondness that belied her sarcastic words. "Because no matter how much we screw up, we keep going." "Mostly because the alternative isn't appealing," Jane pointed out, though her eyes were bright with something that looked suspiciously like hope. The Horizon Ark sailed on through the void, a testament, not to its structural soundness, but to the grit and determination of those who called it home. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and that was enough. Nerys took a deep breath, feeling the weight of survival settle on her shoulders. There was no denying the challenges they'd overcome, nor the ones they would undoubtedly face in the future. But for now, they were alive, and that was a victory in itself. "Let's get moving," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We've got a universe to annoy." With that, the crew returned to their stations, each one knowing that they'd come too far to give up now. They'd faced death and come out the other side, scarred but unbroken. And as long as they stuck together, there was nothing they couldn't handle. The Horizon Ark continued its journey, a beacon of humanity's stubborn refusal to go quietly into that good night. And as the stars stretched out around them, the crew couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in what they'd accomplished. Sure, they were a ragtag bunch, held together by cynicism and duct tape, but they were also a family. And if the universe had a problem with that, it could take it up with the Chronarchs. "Next stop," Nerys said, her voice carrying a note of challenge. "Wherever the hell we decide." "Hope it's got a bar," Sam quipped, earning a laugh from the rest of the crew. And with that, the Horizon Ark sailed into the unknown, a symbol of defiance and hope in a universe that rarely gave second chances. But as always, they'd make the best of what they had and find a way to laugh at the darkness.